What exactly does everybody get wrong about the MMA GOAT convo? We're going to be reacting to a video by LucasTracy today because he had a fantastic take on the topic. Now, typically when I do my reaction videos, I have not seen the video, but I did watch this one while I was at work and I thought it was great, and I thought it would make for a really great reaction video because he does bring up some very interesting points about the UFC GOAT convo in general, because so many people have different opinions on it, right? Anyways, we're going to react to that in just a second. Before we do, though, I do want to say hello, everybody, and welcome back to another video. If you're new here, my name is Kyle. I'm your guy with too many YouTube channels. Guys, let's watch this video over by LucasTracyMMA, what everybody gets wrong about the GOAT convo.
Merab Dvalishvili is a top 15 UFC fighter of all time. That's just a fact. And the only reason people disagree with that is because they always get the GOAT conversation wrong.
Now, that is a very hot topic to really bring forward at the very beginning, because Merab, when you really think about it, the guys that he's beat, the division that he's in, and I've always been sitting here and I've always been one to say that at UFC's bantamweight 135-pound division is literally the toughest division in combat sports, and I don't think it's close at all. So that's not really too wild in my opinion.
And that's what we're here to discuss today. A lot of people have been putting out their top 15 GOAT lists in response to my top 15 UFC GOATs. And not all of their picks are off, but everyone gets the same things wrong.
And I don't remember exactly all of the points that he brought up, but I'm interested in getting into it. But for context on how I feel about this, I do not believe John Jones is the greatest of all time, because I think PEDs excuse you from the conversation. I really have to sit back and think about it, because my gut says Khabib because of how dominant he was, and he did fight some high-level opponents, but he lacks the resume. If we spoke about this before Volkanovski got knocked out twice, I would have said Alexander Volkanovski is the greatest fighter of all time, but that's the toughie. That's a real big toughie, so I'm interested to see what Lucas has to say over here.
And we're going to talk about that today. Demetrious Johnson at number 3, Demetrious Johnson number 2. Man, fuck it, just put him in the number 1 spot if it's based on vibes. And this is the thing that I'm going to get at. We're going to talk about what everyone gets wrong about the GOAT list.
And I don't recall if he ends up saying that Mighty Mouse is wrong on the GOAT list, which I do disagree with, but I understand the criticisms towards Mighty Mouse.
Because I just think people need to have consistent criteria. You know, Bedtime made his video. He had DJ number 2, Khabib at number 3. No, he didn't have Khabib at number 3, but he had DJ at number 3. And it just doesn't make any sense.
I disagree with that. When you look at Mighty Mouse, and you know when your fighters are in there, and I get it, he hasn't fought the best level of competition, but he's fought enough high-level competition, in my opinion, to show exactly what kind of level that he's at. Like, I'm sitting here, and I wholeheartedly believe that Demetrious Johnson would beat, like, Brandon Moreno. He would have beat Amir Albazi. He would have beat Kai Kara-France. He would have beaten all of these guys in the flyweight division that are already so fantastic. And I think that Mighty Mouse would hold his own in the 135 division. The only guy that I can see giving Mighty Mouse issues at 125 is actually Deiveson Figueiredo. And when Deiveson Figueiredo was maybe a couple years younger. But that's even a big maybe. So I do believe that Mighty Mouse does belong on the GOAT list. Top 5 at the very minimum. But let's continue on.
It doesn't make any sense. Okay?
All right, now here's the issue, and I never know where I'm supposed to put my face cam on a LucasTracy video. So what I am covering here is Merab's best wins. Win versus Aldo, top 10 all-time fighter. Win versus O'Malley. Win versus Petr Yan. Also wins over Senri Cejudo. DJ's best win, and 7 other fighters. Demetrious Johnson's best wins are 1-1 with Cejudo and 2-0 versus Benavidez. I understand that. I get that, and I know that we're going to hear about it a little bit more. At the top of the screen, it says people literally just put DJ in the top 3 just because in no world is his resume better than Volk or Makhachev. That's true, but at the same time, he has all of the technique in the world, and I don't think that everybody can just confidently sit here and say that Mighty Mouse wouldn't destroy the flyweight division still to this day.
Time to respond. All right? But listen. We got to talk about Merab. And I think that this is the perfect fighter to talk about when it comes to the GOAT conversation. And I'm not going to do a rankings video, but I think, again, I need to reiterate the most important factor when it comes to the GOAT conversation is the quality of opponents that someone has beat. And that's based on whether or not those opponents that were beaten have had phenomenal careers, or when they got beat, the win aged well by them going on to do really great things.
Now, I think that's a really good criteria to go about if you're talking about a GOAT list. The only thing that I do believe he's missing is domination. That's something that Mighty Mouse had. That's something that Khabib had, but they didn't really have the resume. The issue is, all they needed to do was beat a couple opponents to kind of show what level they were. Khabib beat a prime Conor McGregor. Mighty Mouse fought, and I would say that Henry Cejudo is his best win, in my opinion. Henry Cejudo, it was a fantastic fight. He went 5 rounds with one of the greatest combat athletes of all time. That shows me that he belongs at the top, even if he doesn't have that same resume. But I do understand, and I do also agree with what Lucas is saying.
This is why I always say that Anderson Silva and his resume is kind of overrated, because people will still kind of have him in the top 5, although that's becoming less popular. But
yeah, that's ridiculous to have Anderson Silva as a GOAT. That's ridiculous. And that's actually somebody who hasn't fought anybody, and I believe Anderson Silva would lose to the majority of the middleweight division. That'd be an interesting deep dive to take one day, but that's the difference. Mighty Mouse would beat today's flyweight division. Anderson Silva would not beat his middleweight, the middleweight division that exists right now. And he failed the PED test.
If you look at all the people that he beat, none of them really went on to do great things. And that's very different from, for example, an Adesanya, when Adesanya beat Robert Whittaker. Adesanya beat Robert Whittaker. That was a great win, in part because Robert Whittaker then went on to continue to beat the shit out of a lot of people. Marvin Vettori, Jared Cannonier, he beat Paulo Costa, he beat Ikram Aleskarov, he beat Darren Till. I mean,
and he didn't just beat them, he shined in all of those fights. So Adesanya's win did age gracefully.
Whittaker has a ton of wins post that Adesanya won, even Adesanya himself. But listen, we got to talk about this. The reason why people aren't ready for the Merab Dvalishvili top 15 all-time take is simply because they are biased and they do not think about the GOAT conversation in an objective way.
And that's always been crazy to me, and that's something that a lot of people, like, I mean, it's a world issue. It's not necessarily an MMA community issue, because people always talk about, like, oh, well, Merab's boring, I'm not going to consider him one of the greatest fighters of all time. It's fine if you don't want to consider him to be one of the greatest of all time, but so many people just, like, include their favorite fighters, like, oh, yeah, this guy would have done great. This guy was so underrated. You know, I don't understand how people can't just look at somebody, even though that they dislike them, and understand their talent level. It's also crazy to me that we have to, like, make videos like this, like Lucas Tracy just made it. I'm saying it right now. It's crazy to me that we have to make these videos and say, hey, maybe when we're making a list like this, or just speaking in general, maybe we should look at things objectively instead of, I feel like, it's crazy. It's crazy to me.
Like, the way that people view Merab top 15 is like, what the fuck, bro?
And that's what I'm saying. They freak out. They freak out.
Get him out of here. Dude, come on, man. You got to be trolling at this point. But then it's like, you'll put Demetrius Johnson at number 3, which just doesn't make any sense. And we're going to talk about this.
I'm ready.
So let's get into it, okay? Let me compare Demetrius Johnson and Merab, and I'll bring up some really good examples. The reason why people have Demetrius Johnson so high on the all-time list is simply because he had a lot of title defenses and a lot of title wins.
Now, that's also important. I like that he brought that up, because that's also a reason that people have Anderson Silva at the top. That's why people have John Jones at the top. I would count them both out because of their PED failures. But when you're comparing what they've done in the octagon, Merab has better names than Mighty Mouse, and Merab has dominated the majority of these fighters, like dominated. Like, if you want to talk about Khabib being a pound for pound number 1, the greatest of all time because of his domination, you must include Merab with that.
But at the end of the day, a title win, a title defense, yes, there's something to be said about, like, staying on top when the pressure gets going and the wolf on top is all. Listen, enough of the bullshit about the wolf on top, okay? Fuck that. We're here to get objective. I'm fucking done with the wolf on top bullshit. Okay?
Yeah, and I don't understand what the big deal is, man. Like, I can dislike a fighter all I want and just, yeah, they're one of the best ever. Like, I talk about John Jones. Like, I think that if you want to talk about the GOAT list, PEDs should just excuse you from it. Like, I've been saying that probably quite a few times in this video already. But I can still just look at John Jones and understand that he would dominate all of my favorite fighters. I don't understand what the big deal is. Like, honestly.
What we're going to be talking about is a win in and of itself. That's all that matters. That's all that matters, is a win in and of itself. And I'm gonna prove to you guys, not that Demetrius Johnson is lower than Merab, but if you've got Demetrius Johnson top 5, if you've got Demetrius Johnson top 10, you better have Merab in the top 15. And again, I talked about this in my last GOAT conversation. Everybody has this thing against the bantamweights. What's going on? There's no bantamweights on the GOAT list.
I actually never thought of that. Why is that? I don't think it's because anybody necessarily has anything against bantamweights. It's people have something against Merab and people have something against O'Malley specifically.
None of them. Dominic Cruz, no one talks about him in a top 15 conversation.
That's not true. People talk about Dominic Cruz all the time. I don't know what, like, I've agreed with a lot of what he said so far, but people still talk about Dominic Cruz like he's one of the best. And that's something that I've always disagreed with, by the way. His style just needed to be figured out.
Yet we talk about the bantamweight division as being one of the most stacked divisions. And the guy that beats all the bantamweights is not in the conversation? When we hold names like Peter Yan, Sean O'Malley so highly, Henry Cejudo, for example, it doesn't make any sense. But let's get back to what I was saying.
So what my face cam is covering over here is that Khabib's title win against RDA is worse than Khabib's non-title win against RDA. It says RDA. Khabib's title win against RDA. I think he might have meant to say Al Iaquinta.
All that matters are wins in and of themselves. I don't care if a title was attached to a win. Yes, that means something in the real world. Okay, you get the belt, you get the clout. I get it. But when it comes to ranking someone's resume, all that matters is, did the person you beat have a good resume himself?
I agree with that completely. I agree with that 100%. While the title is very important and having a lot of title defenses can mean a lot to your resume, like the person that makes me think about this off the top of my head is Max Holloway. Look at the resume he's put together. And I know that he just ended up getting finished at the time of recording this video, but look at what he's put together when he was not been champion. He's becoming one of the greatest fighters ever. I know that's a hot topic to say, but you guys get my point what I'm saying with Max Holloway.
And that just simply is not the case for the majority of Demetrius Johnson's opponents. For example, let's take Max Holloway, who has a...
Okay, I swear to you, I forgot that I've watched this video when it came out. I forgot that he brought up Max Holloway as an example. My apologies.
Ton of great non-title wins. Let's take his win against Calvin Kattar, his win against Yair Rodriguez, and Arnold Allen. And you know what? Let's just toss in Justin Gaethje. Those 4 non-title wins are way better than Demetrius Johnson's title wins against, let's say, John Moraga, Ali Bugatinov, Chris Caruso, and Kyoji Horiguchi.
Yep, I think that's completely true. 100%.
We could all agree with that. But because those 4 big wins on DJ's resume have a title next to them, that adds to his 11 title wins, which is one of the main reasons why everyone has him top 5.
Yeah, that's a good point. People don't look at who Demetrius Johnson beat for the belt. They just say, oh my God, he defended the title 11 times. Same thing with John Jones. Exact same thing. Meanwhile, you can take a look at like Thiago Santos. You can take a look at Alexander Gustafsson when he's washed up, things like that.
Because of the big 11. Like someone's going to say, yeah, bro, because you want the belt, bro. Like Demetrius Johnson's resume is inflated because of the title wins. But let's get serious about the flyweight division back in the day. The flyweight division had a total of 10 people in it. There was nobody around. It got to the point to where they were giving him fighters that were recently cut from the UFC, had fought their way back on Tough, the TV show, and in their first fight back in the big leagues in the UFC after getting cut, having to go through Tough, was for a title shot. Demetrius Johnson was fighting Tim Elliott.
And I, you know what, on to that point, I will forever agree that Tim Elliott is a very, very tough opponent. Tim Elliott is a respectable win. Is his record the best? No, but he brings it. You remember that fight against Demetrius Johnson? That was a very, very good performance by Tim Elliott. The other issue is that Demetrius Johnson has fought enough high-level opponents to show me that he belongs at the very, very top. He would have steamrolled, like I said, like I've been talking about at the beginning of the video, he would have steamrolled the flyweight division today. I wholeheartedly believe that. I can't say the same thing about Anderson Silva. I can't say the same thing about John Jones. I can't say the same things about a lot of champions in different weight classes, even GSP. Demetrius Johnson would, and the flyweight division has evolved tremendously. I understand where Lucas is coming from, and he's not wrong. He's not wrong, especially when comparing the wins, but Mighty Mouse still is at that level, and he is one of the GOATs of the sport.
He got cut. And this is the thing. It's like they were just throwing him anyone. And so, yes, even though Demetrius Johnson is high on the all-time list, you best believe Merab Dvalishvili is on the all-time list as well.
I agree with that, 100%. Merab is higher than Mighty Mouse on the all-time list.
He just is. Let's think about the wins. okay? Because people aren't ready for the conversation. Let's talk about it. Peter Yan has a resume that can stand close with Henry Cejudo, and that is Demetrius Johnson's best all-time win. Peter Yan has beaten a good version of Jose Aldo. Peter Yan beat Corey Sandhagen, and this was for an interim title.
And Peter Yan beat Sean O'Malley.
All right, but, you know, Corey Sandhagen at the time was deserving of a title shot nonetheless. That was an amazing win. Peter Yan arguably beat Sean O'Malley, but either way, you know, we could forget about that. But I still think he beat Aljamain Sterling, and I still kind of count that. Okay, the first fight that is, because
Yeah, Peter Yan is one of the... I don't want to say one of the greatest fighters of all time, but man, if he just had a couple W's over there, man, like he definitely would be.
Saw them fight for about 19 minutes, and I saw him beat Aljamain Sterling for the majority of those 19 minutes. And I'm not just going to sit here and act like that fight never happened. It seemed like Peter Yan was winning that fight, even though he lost the second. So Peter Yan has wins over Corey, Aljo, maybe Sean, if you're going to count that. He's got a win over... Who else? Jose Aldo, a really good version of Aldo. You know,
yeah, the point being, he beat a lot of these fighters when those fighters were in their primes and on win streaks themselves. O'Malley, Yan, Cejudo, Merab, and even when he beat Marias too. Marias was killing people. Marias beat Aljamain Sterling.
He's got a win over Jimmy Rivera, who's an absolute marauder. He's got a win over modern-day Song Yadong. Song Yadong is better than most of the people Demetrius Johnson has ever fought.
Yes, and I think that he's kind of saying that like Song Yadong, like, oh really, like Song Yadong is better. Song Yadong is one of the best fighters in the bantamweight division. He's very, very underappreciated. But besides maybe Cejudo, I'd have to agree with that.
Okay, Peter Yan is one of the best bantamweights ever. Merab Dvalishvili 50-45'd Peter Yan. That is an insanely good win.
Wasn't even that. He just flat out dominated him. It wasn't like, oh, at least you know what, some of the rounds were pretty close. No, he just steamrolled Peter Yan.
And he also beat Jose Aldo. Fair enough, an older Jose Aldo, but a Jose Aldo years before he beat Jonathan Martinez. A Jose Aldo that was riding a crazy win streak that if he had won that fight was going to be fighting for a belt. Basically.
Hang on, do you ever wonder, I just thought about this now, do you ever wonder that this is what spawned the Merab hate? It just might be, because I was thinking about Jonathan Martinez, or sorry, not Jonathan Martinez, excuse me, Mario Batista. Mario Batista beat Aldo by kind of neutralizing his game as much as you hate it. As much as you hate it, okay? He did neutralize the game. Holding him up against the fence, not getting takedowns. Mario Batista did the same thing. Mario Batista is now one of the most hated fighters of all time. Merab is still probably also one of the most hated fighters of all time. It might just be people being upset that Aldo lost at this point.
Basically a #1 contender, Jose Aldo. Merab beat. And fair enough, a bit of an older version, but still 10 times more goated than everyone but Henry Cejudo on Demetrius Johnson's resume.
Yeah, I agree with that. Cejudo, and going 5 rounds with Cejudo, especially in such a close fight, like there's nothing to take away from it. Like, even if you want to say 1-1, I know there's a lot of people that think Demetrius Johnson won the second fight with Henry Cejudo. The point being, it's close enough to not be like, oh, well, he went 1-1. No, he had to... It is 1-1, but he had 2 fantastic fights and arguably won that fight against Cejudo. Beating him twice says a ton. Finished him the first time, had a fantastic, fantastic fight the second time. And for context on that, I do believe that Henry Cejudo did win the second fight.
And he happens to be 1-1 with Henry Cejudo as well. Let's also talk about Henry Cejudo. Merab Dvalishvili beat Henry Cejudo. Okay? Yes, an older version, but still a solid win.
I don't even like, it was an older version, but still, that older version of Henry Cejudo is still an absolute animal. I think it's more so Merab just being as dominant as he is, instead of looking at Henry Cejudo and saying he's old, because Henry Cejudo arguably won his fight with Aljamain Sterling. Like, it was a very, very close fight, and look at what Aljamain Sterling's done in the division.
I myself even think that beating an older version of a Henry Cejudo, maybe a 2025 Volk, is more impressive than beating the tadpole versions of themselves. You know, when I say tadpole, I'm talking about like the McGregor win over Max Holloway. That was like a tadpole Max. I think beating a slightly older Max is more impressive than beating a tadpole version of Max.
Well, yeah, slightly older, but the problem is, like, once these fighters in the bantamweight division get to like 37, 39, ages like that, then that's tough. I would say they're a little bit worse than the tadpole versions of themselves, but I do understand the point that he's bringing.
So I still think that the Jose Aldo and the Henry Cejudo wins are very good for Merab. But even if you forget about those, even if you're going to forget about that, he still has the Petr Yan win. He has a Sean O'Malley win, and Sean O'Malley has a good resume at bantamweight. I mean,
and again, it's important to note, these aren't just a Sean O'Malley win. These aren't just a Henry Cejudo win. These are dominations, destructions of these great fighters that we all know, love, and respect.
Again, knocked out Aljamain Sterling, absolutely messed up Chris Moutinho.
Sorry about the quick jump cut there, guys. I ended up having to record this video a little bit later. Something came up. Let's continue on.
And arguably beat Petr Yan. Either way, him and Yan kind of cancel out. Beating modern-day Sean O'Malley, who's an absolute nightmare, who had a title defense.
Yeah, and people are talking about Sean O'Malley like he wasn't this great champion either. I know that he didn't stack up a ton of title defenses, but at the end of the day, he's still a fantastic fighter. Now we're talking about, oh, who did Sean O'Malley beat? It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. The guy can contest with the best of the best, and he was a champion.
Who was a champion. Okay, beating Petr Yan, who was a champion. Beating former double champ Henry Cejudo. Beating top 10 all-time Jose Aldo. Beating Marlon Moraes, and then outside of all of those, having like 6 or 7 other wins on that win streak.
And again, it's important to note, they're not just wins, they are steamrolling dominations.
Just because he doesn't have 11 title defenses doesn't mean that that's not amazing. And at what point are we going to put one of the greatest bantamweights ever in the top 15? Is it really that controversial? I don't think so. I really don't think so.
It shouldn't be controversial, but the problem is you have so many people just automatically hating on Merab's style ever since maybe... Yeah, actually, now that I said it, it might be because of the Jose Aldo loss, but still. People don't like the boring wrestler that Merab is, which I never understood either. I've always personally really liked, though. I find it fascinating when people are extremely dominant. Like, I find it fascinating the fact that nobody can stop what Merab does in the wrestling department. Same reason why I enjoyed watching Khabib. It's not boring to me. I enjoy the domination.
At this point, it's like, and this is just how it is. Listen, it always seems like, you know, I'm picking on Demetrius Johnson's resume, but the point that I'm making is what people get wrong about the GOAT list is it's really just about the quality of the person who you beat based on that person's resume. Yes, sometimes you have to factor in whether or not that person was in their prime. But as I said, if they're slightly past their prime and they're not totally washed like a...
Yeah, the only thing is if they're not totally washed or they're brand new to the UFC. The perfect example that he used was the Max Holloway that fought Conor McGregor. That Max Holloway is nowhere near the fighter that he is today.
Modern day Tony Ferguson, then I still think you have to rate those wins.
Yeah, like John Jones. I want to fight Stipe Miocic because he's the greatest heavyweight of all time. That's going to look good on my resume. No, John Jones.
And ultimately what I'm saying is, and if it was all about just quantity, if it was all about title wins, then why aren't we including guys like Ben Askren? Why aren't we including guys in other promotions that had a bunch of title wins as well? Why not?
That's a really good point. People like to dog on Khabib's record, but we might as well include that because it was an insane win streak and it was dominant as well.
Have Ryan Bader in the conversation because the people that they're beating are not that exceptional.
That's actually a really, really good point because nobody talks about any Bellator fighters, one championship fighters, and there are a couple fighters over there like I believe, and I'm even then saying though that's the problem, it's a UFC product. I was about to say Gegard Mousasi, I believe, is one of the best middleweights of all time. But then again, that it goes against the it goes against what Lucas is saying. But it's true. It's true, man.
And it's like, yes, I do think Demetrius Johnson is a top 15 fighter all time. But I don't think he should be in the top 5. And I really do think it's just based off of nostalgia bias and a lazy way of thinking, which is title wins.
Now, I explained why I do believe Mighty Mouse should be top 5 minimum, in my opinion. But there is a lot of people who don't necessarily think about it. They do look at that title number. They go, 11 title defenses. Yup. That's pretty much the extent of their thinking.
You could beat Ian McCall. You could beat Tim Elliott. Oh, Tim Elliott. You could beat John Moraga.
I still disagree about Tim Elliott, by the way. That guy's a good fighter.
But no one even blinks. No one even thinks about a Merab after he beats Jose Aldo, after he beats Petr Yan, after he beats Sean O'Malley, who was on a crazy tear at the time, who had a lot of hype, who had a lot of aura, who was supposed to go in there and knock him out. At what point do we put Merab on the list?
Merab is on the list. He absolutely should be on the list. Now, it's really making me want to sit back and actually make my own GOAT list. Maybe like a top 15 fighter of all time. I think that'd be a really good video, guys. Stay tuned for that. And Merab, like, one of the reasons why I wanted to react to this one is because I do believe, and I agree, and I never really actually thought about it. Like, when we talk about the GOAT conversations, we don't talk about Merab. But I find myself agreeing with what Lucas is saying here.
You know what I mean? If Merab goes out there and beats Umar, what, he's just going to go to, like, the number 14 spot? And so what's he going to have to do to go to the number 1 spot? He's going to have to beat Umar, and then he's going to have to beat Corey Sandhagen. And then
if he beats Corey Sandhagen and Umar Nurmagomedov, this dude is by far the pound-for-pound number 1, and I would say that would be enough for me to call him the GOAT. I think it would. I really think it would. I'd have to really compare it, though.
He's going to have to beat this guy, and then he's going to have to beat this guy. But, like, you know, Alex Pereira can get to our top 10 just by beating a couple guys. You know, and he'll go from 14 to 8 to number 5. But Merab's got to beat 10 more people? It doesn't make sense.
Well, that's because Alex Pereira is actually an exciting fighter. Merab just holds people. It's not the same. It's not the same. Someone goes there, is in there and fights, and someone goes in there to hug.
Merab is a top 15 fighter of all time. He has incredible wins. He has quantity. And if you're going to sit here and say, outside of those guys, who else has he beat? Well, you know, we'll look at Merab's resume.
It's always been a good resume, especially if you want to compare it to Mighty Mouse. But the problem is you're comparing it to Mighty Mouse. I would like to see it compared to someone like George St. Pierre or John Jones. But even then, GSP's wins and John Jones' wins haven't aged all that well.
Outside of the big names, he had the Marlon Moraes.
I know what I just said. Like, of course, it depends on the fighter, but I'm talking like they don't have this outstanding record.
Win, the Cody Stamen win, the John Dodson win, who also Demetrius Johnson beat as well. That's one of his title wins, John Dodson. Gustavo Lopez, Casey Kenny, Brad Katona, Terrian Ware. And it's like, okay, these aren't great names, but that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 wins.
They're not great names, but the vast majority of them are really good fighters in the, again, toughest division in combat sports history.
Outside of the big ones that are also something that adds to his quantity. And that's basically Demetrius Johnson's entire resume is just quantity. So the idea that we're going to go from John Jones and GSP to DJ just doesn't mean, like, what is this based on? What is this based on? It's literally just, DJ's a legend, man. He's just an OG. That's literally what it is.
And that's the only, and I feel bad too when people really dog on Rogan for saying stuff like that, but that's always what I understood about the hate for Joe Rogan recently, which is, it's not nice to see because I'm a fan of Rogan, but at the same time, it's like, oh my God, this guy back in the day, he's an OG. He's a vet, man. You know, all the impressions of Joe Rogan, it's like, people forget, man, and it's completely accurate. That's what a lot of the fan base treats. Like, I have difficult conversations with my family members because they say things like, nobody ever would beat Fedor, right? I'm the youngest person in my family. Nobody ever would beat Fedor. I have these conversations with the guys where it's like, oh, Randy Couture, nobody can compete with Randy Couture. Anderson Silva back in his day, he was unstoppable. But then there's like no convincing these people that the division and MMA wasn't evolved. They was completely weaker. And these fighters still are good fighters, and they very well could still keep up today. But man, like, they wouldn't last.
And again, that doesn't mean he's not one of the GOATs. Like, he's still the flyweight GOAT. He still is GOATed. But one is not like the other. Okay? This resume is not like the others. It just isn't. You do not get to be the number 3 best fighter of all time when your best win is Henry Cejudo, who's not a top 15 fighter of all time, and that's the best win by a long shot, and you're 1-1 with the guy. And it's like, okay, maybe a long shot is a little bit of a stretch, but you go Henry Cejudo, who you're 1-1 with, and then you go to Joseph Benavidez, and then it's literally off of a cliff.
Yeah, unfortunately. But again, we've talked about why I do believe that Demetrius Johnson still is one of the GOATs to this day. I'd have to really sit back and think about it, man, because Lucas is really winning me over even more with this Mighty Mouse case.
Whereas you're looking like, you know, you're looking at Merab, that's 7 quantity wins, including Moraes. And then you've got Jan, and then you've got Aldo, and then you've got O'Malley, and then you've got Cejudo. And he's not even top 15? Again, I understand that everyone's still infatuated with these title wins, but people are starting to do a better job of it. But then it's like, Merab ain't even top 15. He is. He is top 15.
Yep. 100% top 15 greatest fighter of all time. 100%. And that could always change if he starts losing down the road. But as of right now, absolutely.
If he's not top 15, what's it going to take? And why is he being held to such a higher standard than these other GOATs?
Because he's a boring wrestler, Lucas. Other guys actually come in to fight. Other guys actually use their martial arts.
Why does Merab have... Merab's going to have to beat, you know, Khabib 3.0, Umar Nurmagomedov?
No, it doesn't matter what wins Merab gets now because people already hate him. It does not matter what he does for the entirety of his career. People are still going to look at him like he's this useless, boring wrestler who comes in there, does not dominate people, and they just hug. He just hugs the entire time.
He's going to have to beat another guy even to be considered as a top 15 all-time fighter. People just don't fuck with Merab. And I understand dominance is important as well. Yes, Demetrius Johnson was out here trick-shotting people. Yes, Demetrius Johnson was out here making it look easy. And there's something to be said for Khabib.
And this is where the competition comes into play because Merab is dominating the toughest opponents out of everybody we spoke about.
In that regard as well, he was dominating people. And Merab... his fight with Aldo wasn't dominant, but a win is a win at the end of the day. A win
but that's even just one fight. How many fights has Merab had where he wasn't dominant? Right?
It's a win. And the only time we're really going to get into dominance and all that other stuff is if, you know, it's very close as far as quality of opponents are concerned. And then you got to get into the nitty-gritty details.
And that's where I don't know if I agree with that because I think dominance still is something that's very, very important to take a look at because these guys, we're talking about the greatest fighters of all time. When we talk about Khabib, somebody who's never even bled, like Merab's been rocked before. Merab's been hurt. Merab's been on the back foot before. Khabib walked in and smashed people. Controlled them like they didn't even belong in the octagon with him. I think that is something important to consider when you're talking about the greatest fighters of all time. You could have a guy who has the quality of wins, but even a little bit of close fights, and then you have Khabib who doesn't have all of the quality wins, but he has enough to, like I said with Mighty Mouse, enough where we've seen he can contest with some of the greatest fighters we've ever seen. He comes in there and absolutely mauls them.
Right? But yeah, I think that it needs to be said. Merab is one of the all-time greats. People need to start recognizing that. For whatever reason, as I've said a million times, the last time I'm going to say it, people just do not talk about bantamweights as being some of the greatest fighters to ever do it for whatever reason.
I feel like hardcore fans do talk about that, but when we talk about the greatest fighters ever, yeah, for some reason we're stuck to heavyweights. Heavyweights and St. Pierre.
But yeah. What else is there to talk about? A guy like Volk. I mean, we may as well get into Volk. You know, people have been hyping up Ilia Topuria a lot, and people are starting to say he's one of the all-time greats.
Yeah, and you can't say that yet. You can't say that yet for about Ilia Topuria. His domination has been completely true so far, and if he continues on, he could be the greatest fighter of all time, but not yet.
And I do agree Ilia Topuria is one of the all-time greats. I just think he needs a little bit more quantity to be like a top 5 all-time fighter. Just a tiny bit more quantity. You know, doesn't even need to, you fuck it, don't even have a belt. Just have him spar Diego Lopez. If he beats him in a sparring session, or we'll bump him up a little bit. But my point is...
yeah, I mean, to be honest, that could work.
You know, a lot of people have been saying things like, well, Ilia beat Max Holloway, and he beat him the best anyone's ever done. Well, it's like, yeah, but y'all are forgetting Volk beat him 3 times.
And not only beat him 3 times, like, Max Holloway had moments against Ilia Topuria. You could argue that Max Holloway, I don't remember what round. Was it? Why am I having a blank right now? Did that fight go 3 rounds? Regardless, Max Holloway at least got a round off of Ilia Topuria, arguably. Volkanovski had a performance where he kind of did better each time, and then in the third fight they had, he schooled the best version of Max Holloway. So I think that's something important to consider as well.
Okay, bedtime. You put DJ at number 3. You had Volk at number 4. We're going to have to talk about this too. Because I already talked about Merab and how Merab should be on there. There is no world where Alexander Volkanovski is lower than Demetrius Johnson on the all-time list, okay?
Prime for prime, Volkanovski is absolutely above Demetrius Johnson. But the problem is, Mighty Mouse has never suffered losses like Volkanovski recently has. And I don't care if that it's on short notice. He's lost 2 in a row really, really bad. And if he continues down this trajectory, then Alexander Volkanovski will have no business in the greatest of all-time conversation.
Hey, this guy beat young Jose Aldo. I'm not even going to get into this argument of Aldo was 32 years old on a 2-fight win streak when Volkanovski beat him. He beat a young Jose Aldo. Volkanovski beat Chad Mendes. You know, people were talking about Conor McGregor, Chad Mendes. Oh, it was a great win back in the 90s.
Chad Mendes was a great win. Chad Mendes is a great fighter. Chad Mendes is a force to be reckoned with.
Volk beat Chad Mendes. You know? He beat Chad Mendes. And Mendes was in his early 30s. He beat Darren Elkins, who was on a 6-fight win streak at the time. Darren Elkins was on a 6-fight win streak. You know, Darren Elkins is back in the day. If you watch back in the day, man, Darren Elkins was fucking balling, man. He was balling. They were calling him a problem. He was like Kevin Holland in 2018. Darren Elkins.
He's kind of right, kind of wrong. Kind of right, kind of wrong.
But not only did he beat Chad Mendes, young Jose Aldo, and one of the GOATs, Darren Elkins, but he also beat Brian Ortega. He also beat Yair Rodriguez.
And again, it's important to note, these aren't just wins. They're not like great fights. Volkanovski schooled them and dominated them.
And he also beat Max Holloway
3 times. And I don't remember if I mentioned it about Volkanovski. Yes, I did. Prime for prime, there's no question in my mind, Alexander Volkanovski is the greatest fighter to ever grace the octagon.
And then he beat Max again. And then he beat Max again. And a lot of people are hyped off of this Ilia Topuria Max Holloway win. Volk beat him 3 fucking times.
That's way more impressive than what Ilia Topuria did, because we were all questioning when Max Holloway's chin was actually going to get cracked. It was bound to happen, and it finally did happen. Now, that's nothing to take away against Ilia Topuria. It's a combination of both Max Holloway aging, him taking a lot of shots, and Ilia Topuria's timing and power.
Okay? And I understand there's something that people don't like. Oh, you can't just keep beating the same person. Every time someone beats Max Holloway, that is considered an insanely good all-time win. Okay? And you know what? At the end of the day, a win is a win. You beat that guy 3 times, that's 3 all-time Max Holloway wins.
Yeah, that's a good point. It's not like you can't just count it as 1 win. It was 3 wins against one of the greatest fighters ever.
And you got Jose Aldo, and you got the Ortegas, you got the Yairs, you got the Elkins. What are we doing? Okay?
And I know that I don't think there's anybody really counting out Alexander Volkanovski unless he's talking to Bedtime specifically. If so, I haven't watched Bedtime's greatest of all time list. Maybe he's just counting out Alexander Volkanovski. A lot of people would have put Alexander Volkanovski somewhere towards the top, a pound for pound. People don't really call him the greatest of all time, but if you were to bring up these arguments, I don't think people would really refute it all that much.
One guy got KO'd by... No. Wait a second. One guy got a draw with Ian McCall, okay? One guy got a draw with Ian McCall, lost a split decision to Cejudo, 1-1 with Cejudo.
But like Ian McCall, it's like counting the losses from some of the greatest fighters from when they first started, like we talked about with Holloway against McGregor. When looking at Max Holloway's legacy, that's not the Max Holloway that we all know, you know?
That's his best win all time. And Volk, 3 wins over Max. Like, he's not higher. Based on what?
Based on him losing recently, I believe that's what it is. And if he continues fighting at the rate that he's fighting, like he still wants to take on Diego Lopez, I can see him getting finished there, man. He might be past his prime. And then we're going to look at Alexander Volkanovski like Tony Ferguson. I know this is something that Lucas was worried about. This is something that I've been talking about as well. I believe Alexander Volkanovski is going to go out on the level of like a Tony Ferguson of BJ Penn. He's going to be like, you just got to stand up for yourself. You just got to do what you need to do. You need to make sure it's done. We're going to go in there. We're going to take care of business, and that's it. And then he's going to keep getting knocked out each time, just like Tony.
It's based on this. It's based on DJ was an absolute baller back in the day, man. DJ was trick shotting people. He's doing the spinning arm bars and all that. That's literally all it's based on. It's based on DJ by vibes.
If you're talking about Volk, though, it's got to be based on the recent losses as well. But he is right about a lot of old fighters, not just DJ, not just DJ. When you're talking about like the GOATs of the heavyweight division or the GOATs of specific divisions, these types of things are brought up. Then it's off of vibes.
Okay? Listen, people need to start being more objective, man. They got to be more
Hey, it's almost 2025. There will be no objective speaking, okay?
objective. Okay? They got to be more...
Yeah, but Chael Sonnen's my favorite fighter, and I feel like he's the greatest of all time. I feel he's the best. Carlos Condit's one of my favorite fighters ever. I feel he's the best. That's the 2024 way.
Objective. Volkanovski, in my opinion, is a top 5 all-time fighter. And Merab is a top 15. And that's it. And it's got to make sense. Listen, I'm not saying Merab...
Now, I would have both of those on my own list. I'm going to make my own list, man. I'm going to make my own list. I don't know how it's going to look exactly, but both of those fighters absolutely will be there.
His top 5. I'm not saying Merab is top 10, but I think he just cracked the top 15. And it's kind of like the pound for pound list. If he loses, okay, all right, that's going to change his resume. But the GOAT list is very similar to the pound for pound list. And I think that, again, I should have said this much earlier, but it is very similar to the pound for pound list, you know? People are always moving up and down the pound for pound list. And how do you get to the top of the pound for pound list? You beat other fighters on the pound for pound list.
And it's more so like recency bias. And I don't even know if I want to call it bias for the pound for pound, but it's more of what you've done recently and not really based off a legacy unless you're John Jones.
That's how it works. That's how the GOAT conversation works. Like, Merab's not going to be able to beat a GSP, obviously, but he's able to beat other amazing bantamweights, and he's done that. He's beaten the bantamweights he's had to beat that have the best resumes.
And he's probably not done. He's probably going to continue to steamroll people throughout.
Merab's up there. He's up there, man.
And that video ended very, very quickly. Guys, let me know what you thought about everything down below. That was a great video by Lucas. Really won me over Merab. And I was already thinking of like a little bit more of the same Merab, but it really pushed that point home from me. But the conversation about the greatest fighters of all time does not have to end there. Who do you think can beat Ilia Topuria specifically? If you want to talk about that, then watch this video right here. I'd love to have you guys over there. Take care, everybody.